Education for a world worth living in. Can we say that a world is worth living in with education? Varied answers may come to your mind. But before that, let us have first the pedagogy, education, Bildung, practice, and praxis. In a rapidly changing world, education is vital for humankind and for the world itself. Education is oriented towards the good for each person and the good for humankind. Yet, in an era of schooling, it is not always clear how teaching, learning, researching education, and leading in educational institutions lead to good outcomes. Considering what constitutes education for the good and indeed good educational practices, the Pedagogy, Education, and Praxis Network has provided a collaborative cross-institutional and cross-national platform for exploring these issues and other aspects of educational practice and practice development through a research program aimed at investigating the nature, conditions, and traditions of pedagogy, education, and praxis and how they are understood in different settings. Conversation of traditions is a means of interrogating the origins and formations of our own understandings, presuppositions, and traditions. When diverse perspectives are put into conversation with each other, there is potential for greater understanding of contemporary educational issues and about how they might be addressed. The theory of practice architectures recognizes individuals and groups that make changes to pre-existing arrangements. In relation to education, for example, it is easy to see how the practices of students' learning, teachers' professional learning and teaching, leading, and educational researching rely on and make one another relevant. But sometimes, there might not be a relationship where we expect to find one when the student does not learn despite the teacher's practices of teaching. Praxis and practice. Through their practices, each person can shape their circumstances and act rightly. While the intentional and morally committed actions taken by individuals and collectives in an endeavor to act rightly within these circumstances can be called praxis. Education, pedagogy, and Bildung refers to the formation, cultivation, and upbringing of the child and also the child's continuing education as a young person and adult. Education, pedagogy, and Bildung. Classical notions of pedagogy invoke the cultivation of the individual person imagined as a person who would play an active role in the life of a society or state. In Anglophone countries, education has a high and low meaning. High meaning in English refers to philosophy of education, while the low meaning of education simply refers to schooling rather than to education as a discipline. Bildung is a German tradition of self-cultivation. Traditions of Bildung include collaborative practices for learning. But Bildung have been criticized for the lack of clarity about what basic education should cover and whose values should be followed. The chapter concludes by providing an introduction to the chapters in the rest of the book.